today. I attended my son's funeral, but you know what's strange? I couldn't cry. It was the first time I'd seen my son's face in 3 years, but no tears came. Or rather, I'd say my tears had run dry. I'd already cried too much. On the way home from the funeral, there was a package sitting on my doorstep. The sender's name read, Kim Do-hoon, my son's name. A package sent by someone who was already gone. My hands were shaking when I opened the box. Inside, I found an old letter and a worn bankbook. The moment I saw that bankbook, I knew. I understood why my son hadn't answered my calls, why he hadn't shown his face for 3 years, and why he'd prepared for his death alone. This is a story about a family that fell apart over money. But in the end, it was never really about the money at all. The truth I realized far too late. Let me tell you about it now. In our house, money was always the main topic of conversation. My husband, Kim Chol-soo, ran a small metalworking factory. Back in 1985, there was still hope that the Korean economy would improve. My husband would get up at 5 a.m. and come home at 11 p.m. His fingernails were always black with grease, and his hands were covered with burn marks. I did alterations at home. When neighbors brought me torn pants or worn-out school uniforms, I'd work the sewing machine late into the night. The sound of that machine was my children's lullaby. My son Do-hoon. That's how he grew up. When I was pregnant with Do-hoon, I worked at the factory until I was 8 months along. When my belly got so big I could barely reach the sewing machine pedal, my husband told me to just hold on a little longer. He said things would get better once the baby was born. I believed him. The day Do-hoon was born, my husband was at the factory. He had a delivery deadline to meet. I went to the maternity clinic holding the hand of a neighbor. Labor lasted 12 hours, and by the time the baby came, I was barely conscious. But when the nurse placed my baby in my arms, when I heard that tiny breath, I made a promise to myself. This child would not live the way we did. Do-hoon was such a good boy. When he was 5 and a friend showed off a new toy, he'd look envious but never said a word to me. On elementary school field trip days, he couldn't bring himself to ask me to pack him lunch, so he'd put 2 packs of instant noodles in his bag. I only found out later from his teacher that Do-hoon hadn't eaten lunch that day. That night, I held him and cried for a long time. The child patted my back, saying he wasn't hungry, that it was true. Those words broke my heart. Starting in middle school, Do-hoon began delivering newspapers. He'd get up at 4 a.m. and walk the neighborhood. I pretended not to know. When he'd come home before school, I'd make him breakfast and ask if he'd gotten up early, if he couldn't sleep. Do-hoon would smile sheepishly and say he'd been studying. My son and I, we lived trading lies with each other. Lies born from caring. In his senior year of high school, Do-hoon won a scholarship to college. It wasn't one of the top universities, but it was a decent 4-year school in Seoul. The day he got the acceptance letter, for the first time my boy cried in front of me and said, "I did it. We're going to be okay now." A 20-year-old young man saying things like that. My heart ached. I was happy, but somehow also anxious. During his 4 years of college, Do-hoon rarely came home. He said he worked part-time jobs even during breaks. Convenience store, tutoring, weekend events. When he did visit, he'd leave an envelope. Money for household expenses, $200, $300. Money he'd earned himself. I would take that money and put it straight into a savings account to give back to Do-hoon when he got married. After graduating college, Do-hoon got a job at a mid-sized manufacturing company. I didn't ask about his salary, but on the day he received his first paycheck, he came home and handed me an envelope. He said now that he was earning money, he'd contribute a little each month. That envelope contained $500. I shook my head and told him to just take care of himself, that I was fine. But Do-hoon smiled and said he was an adult now. He could do at least this much. Up until then, we were happy. The problem started after that. In 2010, my husband's factory began to struggle. We thought we'd recovered from the financial crisis, but as the global economy wavered again, clients dropped off one by one. Payments weren't coming in on time. My husband came home drunk every night. Stronger than the smell of alcohol was the smell of despair. He couldn't pay the factory rent, and workers' wages were overdue. My husband's back was bending more and more. That fall, the factory closed. The debt was over $70,000. When he heard the news, Do-hoon came home. He sat down on the living room floor and couldn't speak for a long time. My husband couldn't even lift his head. For the first time in front of his son, he felt like a failure. When Do-hoon asked if there was anything he could do to help, I answered, "The best thing you can do for us is to do well for yourself. Just worry about your own life." Those words became a seed, one that would later destroy everything. In 2011, my husband collapsed. It was stress-induced angina. The doctor said he needed surgery immediately, and the cost was $8,000. I didn't have that kind of money. I came home and sat there in a daze for a long time. Then I called Do-hoon. I told him Dad was hospitalized, that he needed surgery. I couldn't get the words out properly. I didn't know it would be this hard to ask my son to lend me money. After a brief silence, Do-hoon said he'd come right away. That night, the boy arrived at the hospital with a pale face and took out his card at the payment desk. I should have noticed then how much his hands were trembling. The surgery went well. My husband recovered. But, that wasn't the end. A month after he was discharged, the landlord came by. 6 months of back rent, $3,600. I called Do-hoon again. This time his response was a bit different. He asked when I could repay the money he'd lent last time. My heart sank. But I said it was still difficult, to please wait a little longer. I heard a sigh on the other end of the line. Then, he said he'd send it. After hanging up, I felt a lump in my throat. Not from gratitude, but because my son's sigh kept echoing in my ears. After that, I borrowed money from Do-hoon 2 or 3 times a year. Dad's rehabilitation costs, my medical bills, living expenses, holiday ceremony costs. At first, it was $300, $500, but later it grew to $1,000, $2,000. Do-hoon became quieter and quieter. He'd say it was difficult this month, but in the end he'd always send it. But in his voice, the life was draining away. In 2015, I heard Do-hoon was getting married. The day he brought his girlfriend home, I was surprised when I saw my future daughter-in-law. She looked so put together. Clean suit, neat hair, bright smile. She worked at a large corporation. Her name was Ji-hyun, and she was truly polite and cheerful. That evening's dinner was warm and pleasant. But after the meal, Do-hoon said to me quietly that wedding preparations were expensive, that he wouldn't be able to help us for a while. Hearing those words, I felt inexplicably angry. My voice got loud. Was he abandoning his parents just because he was getting married? Didn't he remember all we'd done raising him? My husband tried to stop me, but I couldn't. I yelled about how it didn't make sense to turn away from parents who were struggling just because you're getting married. That's when Ji-hyun came out of the bathroom. An awkward silence fell. Do-hoon said nothing. That night, the two of them left early. A month later, Do-hoon called. He said they'd set a wedding date, the 15th of next month. And then he said something even more shocking. Ji-hyun didn't want to invite us to the wedding. She said I'd been cold to her, and she was worried I might say something at the ceremony. Hearing that, my mind went blank. I screamed about how I'd given birth to him and raised him all these years. How could they not let me come to the wedding? My son just kept saying to please understand. Understand what? To understand that he wasn't going to borrow even a penny from his parents now that he was getting married? To understand that we couldn't even come to his wedding? I heard my son sigh over the phone. Then he said he had his own life now. He had to put his own family first, and that the money he'd lent us was over $20,000. When were we going to pay it back? At that moment, I heard something snap in my head. I yelled at my son. Was he asking his own mother to pay him back? Didn't he think about all the money it took to raise him? My son replied that wasn't what parents were supposed to do. At those words, I completely exploded. My son's voice trembled. He said he never asked to be born. He said he'd been afraid of me since he was little, that whenever money came up, my face would change. He said from college on, he'd given every penny he earned from part-time jobs to the family. His friends all went on trips and dated, but he never did any of that because he didn't want me to struggle. But how long was he supposed to do that? When was his life his own? Please, let him go. He wanted to get married. He wanted to build his own family. He wanted to live without depending on his mother. Hearing those words, tears poured out. They weren't tears of anger or sadness or resentment, just an indescribable, hollow feeling. I just said fine and told him to hang up. I hung up the phone. That night, I told my husband we couldn't go to our son's wedding. My husband sat there silently for a long time, then said it was because he was incompetent, that he was sorry. Those words hurt even more. On Do-hoon's wedding day, my husband and I stayed home. It rained from morning. My husband just stared out the window endlessly, and I kept stopping and starting the dishes in the kitchen. 2 p.m., the time when the wedding would begin. I went into my room and took out Do-hoon's childhood photos from deep in a drawer. His 100-day photo. First birthday party. Elementary school entrance ceremony. In the photos, Do-hoon was always smiling. But you know what's strange? At some point, the smile disappeared from Do-hoon's photos. I think it was around middle school. In every photo after that, it looked like he was just forcing the corners of his mouth up. I didn't know that. Or did I choose not to see it? Around the time the wedding would be ending, my husband suddenly said, "Shouldn't we feel sorry toward Do-hoon? Haven't we leaned on him too much?" I argued back. Wasn't it a child's duty to help their parents? But then my husband said, "Still, did we have to go this far when the boy was getting married?" I said angrily, "If you'd earned properly, would we have needed to ask our son for money?" As soon as I said it, I regretted it. My husband's face turned ashen. He just said he was sorry and went into his room. From that night on, my husband stopped responding to me. A month passed, then 2. There was no word from Do-hoon. The holidays approached. New Year's. I thought my son would come. No matter what, surely a son visits his parents on the holidays, right? I prepared the ancestral ceremony table and sat by the door waiting. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Noon passed and Do-hoon didn't come. I couldn't stand it anymore and called, but only an automated message saying the call couldn't be completed. I sent a text. "It's New Year's. Aren't you coming home?" There was no reply. That evening, my husband asked if Do-hoon had come. I said no. My husband said nothing more. Autumn Harvest Festival came. Again, Do-hoon didn't come. No texts, no calls. I blamed my daughter-in-law. That woman had turned our son against us. Do-hoon was such a good boy originally. Thinking that way made me feel a little better. In 2017, my husband collapsed again. This time, it was a brain hemorrhage. As they rushed him to the emergency room, I could only stand there in shock. The doctor said the patient's condition was critical, that he needed major surgery. The cost would be around $20,000. At that moment, everything went dark. I didn't have that kind of money. I called Do-hoon again. "This time," he answered. His voice was cold. I said Dad had collapsed, that he needed surgery, that we needed money. He asked how much. I said $20,000. A long silence followed. Then my son said, "I'm sorry, but that's not possible." I screamed. "Dad could die," my son said. He had his own circumstances. His wife was pregnant, 7 months along. They were preparing for the birth, and it was expensive. Hospital fees, postpartum care center, baby supplies, and they needed to renew their lease. I said, "But your father might die." For the first time, there was a tremor in my son's voice. He'd given us over $30,000. He hadn't gotten back a single penny. I'd said I'd pay it back, but he knew. He knew I could never repay that money. Now he had to raise his own child. He didn't want his child to live the way he did. Hearing those words, I realized The words I'd said to Do-hoon were coming back to me exactly as I'd spoken them. I hung up. In the end, we barely scraped together the surgery costs with government assistance and help from the welfare center. My husband survived, but half his body was paralyzed. He needed a wheelchair. From that day on, I lived caring for my husband. Every day, getting him up from bed, washing his face, feeding him, taking him to the hospital, helping with rehabilitation exercises. Each day was just about surviving. Sometimes my husband would cry, "Sorry for being such a burden to you." I'd say it was okay, that at least we were together. But in my heart, I thought, if Do-hoon were here, it would be a little less hard. In 2019, my husband passed away. Quietly, without a word. I woke up one morning and my husband wasn't breathing. I shook him, but there was no response. At the funeral home, only a few neighbors came. I sent Do-hoon a text. "Dad passed away. Sending you the funeral home address." The read receipt showed, but no reply came. For all 3 days of the funeral, I watched the door. My son would come. No matter what, he'd come to his father's funeral. But Do-hoon never came. When I returned home after the funeral, I was completely alone. An empty house. The wheelchair where my husband used to sit. The study room Do-hoon used as a child. Everything was just traces left behind. That night, I thought for the first time, what did I do wrong? Was I a bad mother? Was borrowing money from my son such a terrible thing? When parents are struggling, isn't it natural for children to help? But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't find an answer. From that day, I lived alone. Without my son, without my husband, I barely scraped by on the basic pension from the government. Sometimes when I thought of Do-hoon, I'd take out the photo album. Pictures of young Do-hoon smiling. That smile now felt so unfamiliar. 1 year passed, then 2. I didn't know how Do-hoon was living, whether my grandchild had been born, was healthy, was happy. I knew nothing. And then, October 2024, that's when the package arrived. Early in the morning, the delivery person rang the doorbell. I opened the door and went out to find a small box. "Sender, Kim Do-hoon." My heart dropped. It was the first word from my son in 3 years. My hands were trembling. I brought the box inside and just stared at it for a long time. What could be inside? Maybe a gift of reconciliation or a final goodbye. Slowly, I opened the box. Inside were 2 things, an old letter and a worn bank book. The moment I saw the bank book, my breath stopped. This was the bank book I'd given to Do-hoon, the account I'd opened when he was in college, for him to save his part-time earnings. I told him to use it when he got married. Why would he send this back? I opened the bank book. Final balance $12,470. But the transaction history was strange. May 30, 2010, deposit $5,000. Note, mother's hospital expenses. November 12, 2011, deposit $3,000. Note, father's surgery costs. March 8, 2012, deposit $1,500. Note, house rent, September 2013. Deposit $2,000. Note, factory debt settlement. Deposit after deposit continued. 2014, 2015, 2016. All debts my son had paid in my place. I didn't know this, that my son had been settling my debts one by one like this. But after 2017, there were no more deposits. The year my father collapsed for the second time. From then on, Do-hoon hadn't put any money into this account. Why? I unfolded the letter. It was my son's handwriting, more scattered than before, trembling letters. Act 5. The Letter and Shocking Truth. The letter read,
Mom, if you're reading this, I'm probably already gone from this world. First, I apologize. You must have been shocked at the funeral home. And when you got home, you would have received this package. Mom, the truth is I've been sick for 3 years. Pancreatic cancer. The year Dad collapsed for the second time, I went to the hospital too. My stomach kept hurting and I couldn't digest anything. They ran tests and the doctor said it was stage 3. I needed to start treatment right away. That day I stood in the hospital corridor for a long time. The treatment would cost over $50,000. But I didn't have that kind of money. Actually, I did. The money I'd lent you over the years, $30,000. My savings, $10,000. My wife's savings, $10,000. Together, it was $50,000. But if I used that money for treatment, what would happen to my wife and our unborn child? We'd need money when the baby was born. We had to renew our lease too. I had to make a choice. Mom, when you called me that day, I was sitting in the hospital corridor. I just received my chemotherapy schedule. You said Dad might die. I thought to myself, I might die too, but I couldn't tell you. If I said I was sick, you'd worry, and you'd try to get money somehow, and things would only get more complicated. So I lied. I said my wife was pregnant, 7 months along. Actually, my wife was only 3 months pregnant then, not 7 months. I deceived you, Mom. I thought you'd understand that way. Mom, I'm sorry. I gave up treatment. The doctor strongly advised against it, but I refused chemotherapy. I decided to just manage the pain. I didn't tell my wife either. I was worried it would affect the baby if she knew while pregnant. So I carried this illness alone. Our son was born. A boy? When I felt that tiny hand grip mine, tears came. Will this child be able to live happily? Will this child be able to live without asking his parents for money? We named him Minjun. One character from my father's name, one from mine. I hoped he'd be like his grandfather. Someone who quietly protects his family. When the child turned 1, my disease progressed to stage 4. I couldn't hide it anymore. I told my wife. At first she was angry. Why hadn't I told her sooner? Why hadn't I gotten treatment? But when I explained everything, she just cried. Why had I shouldered all that alone? I was sorry and grateful. My wife helped me prepare for death, writing a will, arranging insurance, transferring assets to our child's name, and finally, Mom, I think I misunderstood you all this time. Your borrowing money from me wasn't from a bad heart. You had to survive. You had to save Dad, protect our home, get through each day. Your depending on me felt heavy. Too heavy a burden for a 25-year-old young man. But now that I've become a father myself, I understand. Parents don't lean on their children because they're weak, but because they're desperate. Mom, I'm returning this bank book to you. The money in here is the debts I paid off in your place. Factory debts, medical bills, living expenses. I settled everything. I hid it because I was worried you'd feel indebted again. if you knew. And I put in the funds for my funeral, too. I didn't want you worrying about money for my funeral. Mom, you have no more debts. Live comfortably now. The love I couldn't show, Min Jun will show in my place. I asked my wife, when Min Jun grows up, please take him to see his grandmother. Tell him many stories about his grandmother. How hard she worked, how much she loved me. Mom, I was such a terrible son, wasn't I? Turning my back when you were struggling, not even going to Dad's funeral. Such a cold-hearted son. But I never hated you. Not once. I was just scared. If I kept depending on you, I'd spend my whole life worrying about you. So I tried to distance myself. But in the end, I also gave up my life for my family, just like you. Ironic, isn't it? I didn't want to be like you, but I ended up just like you. Mom, I love you, and I'm sorry. If I'm reborn, I'll be a better son. The kind of son who can be there for you when you're struggling. Please be healthy and happy. My wife will send you pictures of Minjun later. He looks just like you. He's so handsome. Your son, Do-hoon.
After reading the entire letter, I collapsed to the floor. I cried, calling my son's name. I don't know how long I cried. It felt like my heart was tearing, that my son had carried such a heavy burden alone, that he'd prepared for death without telling me, all alone. I was so sorry, and I realized how selfish a mother I'd been. What a heavy burden I'd placed on my son. I held the bankbook tight and cried for a long time. The next day, I gathered my courage. I called my daughter-in-law. My voice was cautious. I said I'd received Do-hoon's letter yesterday, that I'd been so terrible, that I was sorry. I heard Ji-hyun crying on the other end. She said she was the one who should apologize for not inviting me to the wedding. I said no, it was all my fault. I'd asked too much of Do-hoon. We cried together for a long time in silence. Then Ji-hyun asked if I'd like to come meet Min-jun. She said Do-hoon had told her to make sure to tell Min-jun about his grandmother. How hard I'd worked, how much I'd done for our family. More tears came. I said thank you. She said she'd bring Min-jun this weekend. That weekend, when the door opened, a small child came running in. Grandma! That voice called out. A 4-year-old boy. Min-jun. He looked just like Do-hoon. The same eyes, the same smile. I knelt down and held him. Min-jun, Grandma missed you so much. The child patted my cheek with his hand and asked, Grandma, why crying? Does it hurt? I said no, Grandma doesn't hurt. I'm just so happy. Ji-hyun went into the kitchen and said Do-hoon told her what I liked, so she brought some. Castella cake. A cake box sat on the table. That afternoon, we ate together. Min-jun sat on my lap, asking all sorts of questions. Grandma, where'd Daddy go? Daddy went to heaven, sweetheart. Heaven? Is that far? Yes. A bit far. Can I go later? Yes, you can go later. The child nodded and held my hand tightly. That night, after Min-jun fell asleep, Ji-hyun said carefully that Do-hoon worried about me until the end. He was so worried about me living alone. He hoped I'd be comfortable. I said I was sorry. Ji-hyun said Do-hoon told her I wasn't a bad person, just someone who was struggling. Those words brought more tears. Then Ji-hyun asked, Would you like to live with us?
It must be hard living alone. We have an extra room. You could stay there.
But I'd be a burden. She said no. Min-jun likes me, and she wants me nearby too. She'll do the love for me that Do-hoon couldn't complete. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in a long time. A month later, I packed my things and moved into my daughter-in-law's house. It was a small room, but it was warm. In the mornings, Min-jun would knock on my door. "Grandma, wake up! Time to eat." I'd eat with the child, and we'd go for walks in the park. Min-jun would hold my hand tight and ask all sorts of things.
Grandma, was Daddy nice?
Yes, Daddy was very nice.
Grandma, do you miss Daddy?
Yes, very much.
Me too.
The child squeezed my hand tighter. That day, I realized what Do-hoon left behind wasn't the money in the bank book. It was this small hand. The warmth of my lost son had returned through this child. Ending. Lingering emotion and gratitude. Today, Min-jun and I visited Do-hoon's grave. The child sat in front of Dad's photo and talked for a long time.
Dad, I live with Grandma now. Grandma makes me yummy food and tells me fun stories.
I looked at Do-hoon's photo and said, "Do-hoon, I'm sorry. Sorry I realized so late. And thank you. Because of Min-jun, I'm alive again." The wind blew as if Do-hoon was answering.
It's okay, Mom. Be happy now.
On the way home, Min-jun asked,
Grandma, does everyone go to heaven?
"Yes, that's right."
Then will you go too?
"Yes, later I will."
I'll go with you.
Min-jun, you have to go much, much later than Grandma.
Why?
Because if you go first, Grandma will be sad. The child nodded and held my hand tightly.
Then you go later, Grandma. Let's live together for a long, long time.
Okay, Grandma will live for a long, long time. That day, I thought for the first time I must live. For Min-jun, for Ji-hyun, and for Do-hoon. Money drove us apart, but love ultimately brought us back together. Late as it was, I finally understand. Family isn't about leaning on each other. It's about embracing each other. And true love from a child isn't money. It's simply being there. Do-hoon, now I understand. In that bank book you left, there weren't just numbers. Your heart was written there. And that heart has come back to me now through Min-jun. Thank you. And I love you. We grew apart over money, but found each other again through love. Understanding came later than the bank book, but eventually it arrived.